In Western Australia, there's a place locals call the Red Dead Zone. 12,000 hectares of toxic, lifeless mining wasteland, where nothing has grown for decades. The soil is so acidic, it burns your skin. The ground is so contaminated that even weeds refuse to sprout. But in 2021, scientists did something that seemed completely insane. They buried 50 million earthworms into this dead earth. That's enough worms to circle the planet twice if you laid them end to end. Farmers laughed. Mining executives called it a waste of money. 2 years later, corn stalks shot up over 10 feet tall, taller than anything ever grown in the region's history. Keep watching because you're about to discover how Australia may have just cracked the code to reversing environmental destruction. Did you know Australia has over 60,000 abandoned mine sites scattered across the continent? That's more than any other developed nation on Earth. And here's the shocking part. The total area of this dead, contaminated land is larger than Belgium. We're talking about an area roughly the size of 11,000 square miles, just sitting there, lifeless and poisoned. These aren't just ugly scars on the landscape. They're expanding environmental disasters, growing by 2% every single year, creeping toward farmland and poisoning underground water supplies that communities depend on for survival. Mining doesn't just remove resources from the ground. It completely destroys everything that makes soil alive. Heavy metals like arsenic, lead, and cadmium seep into the earth. The pH drops so low it becomes more acidic than vinegar, sometimes approaching the acidity of battery acid. Beneficial bacteria die, fungi disappear, earthworms flee or perish, and without these microscopic organisms, soil becomes nothing more than toxic dust that blows across the landscape, spreading contamination further with every windstorm. The harsh truth is that Australia is losing 1.5 million hectares of usable farmland every decade. That's roughly the size of Connecticut vanishing from agricultural production every 10 years. Put another way, every single day Australia loses more arable land than the area of 400 football fields. Government reports have been warning about food security for years, but the problem kept getting worse. The 2019 bushfires made everything more urgent when they devastated 46 million acres and exposed just how fragile Australian soil already was. Meanwhile, the mining boom of the 2000s left behind an ecological debt that nobody wanted to pay. Several major mining companies actually declared bankruptcy specifically to avoid cleanup costs, leaving the government holding a rehabilitation bill estimated at $15 billion. That's $15 billion with a B. Traditional remediation methods cost over $500,000 per hectare, and with 60,000 sites covering millions of hectares, math simply doesn't work. The total bill using conventional methods would exceed the entire national education budget. Australia needed a completely different approach. Before the earthworm breakthrough, scientists tried everything to bring dead mining land back to life. Nothing worked the way they hoped. Chemical remediation was the first attempt. Engineers pumped neutralizing agents into the acidic soil, trying to balance the pH artificially. They used lime, gypsum, and specialized chemical compounds. It worked for a few years. Plants even started growing, but then the soil died again. Without living organisms to maintain the balance, the chemistry simply reverted. Cost: $800,000 per hectare. And the results lasted barely 5 years. Multiply that across thousands of sites, and you're looking at repeated investments that never actually solve the problem. Topsoil replacement seemed logical. Just truck in fresh, healthy soil from somewhere else and spread it over the contamination. But this approach had a fatal flaw. It destroyed the donor sites. You're not solving the problem, you're just moving it somewhere else. And logistically, moving enough soil to cover 60,000 sites would require more trucks than exist in Australia. Engineers calculated it would take a convoy stretching from Sydney to Perth, running continuously for 50 years. Phytoremediation used pollution-absorbing plants to slowly extract toxins from the ground. The idea was elegant, but reality was brutal. Most plants simply died in the harsh conditions. The few that survived took over 30 years to show minimal improvement. Australia didn't have 30 years to wait while farmland continued disappearing. Doing nothing and letting nature heal itself would take between 200 and 500 years. Entire generations would live and die before these lands recovered naturally. The core failure of every method was treating soil as a chemistry problem when it was actually a biology problem. What these dead zones needed wasn't chemicals or fresh dirt. They needed life itself, something that could multiply, adapt, and sustain itself without constant human intervention. In 2021, A partnership between CSIRO, the University of Western Australia, and a private biotech firm called EARTHWORMS launched the most ambitious biological remediation project ever attempted. They called it Project Vermis, Latin for worm. The location they chose was the absolute worst-case scenario, the Kalgoorlie-Boulder region, the heart of Western Australia's historic gold mining belt. 12,000 hectares of completely lifeless wasteland, where the soil pH measured 3.2, nearly as acidic as stomach acid. Nothing had grown there in over 40 years. Scientists figured if earthworms could survive here, they could survive anywhere. If this experiment failed, it would fail spectacularly. But if it worked, it would prove the concept beyond any doubt. Dr. Sarah Chen, the project's lead soil biologist, remembers the day they proposed the idea to government officials. They looked at us like we'd lost our minds, she recalls. 50 million worms in dead mining land? One official actually laughed and said, "You can't grow a weed there, let alone food." But we knew something they didn't. Earthworms aren't just garden helpers. They're biological terraforming machines that have been reshaping Earth's soil for 400 million years. The engineering plan unfolded in 5 carefully designed phases. Phase 1 involved mechanical preparation, breaking apart the compacted mining crust using specialized equipment and creating channels for oxygen to penetrate deep into the earth. Phase 2 was organic matter injection, where 200,000 tons of agricultural waste, compost, and biochar were buried in precise grid patterns across the site. This would become food for the worms and create the initial conditions for life. Phase 3 was the main event, worm deployment. Scientists released 50 million specially bred earthworms, a hybrid of Eisenia foetida and Lumbricus terrestris, calculated at 4,166 worms per square meter. These weren't ordinary garden worms. They were bred for resilience in harsh conditions, capable of surviving temperatures and acidity levels that would kill normal earthworm species. Phase 4 established moisture management through an underground irrigation network that mimicked natural water tables. And Phase 5 introduced companion microbes, beneficial bacteria, and fungi that would work alongside the worms to rebuild the soil ecosystem from the ground up. The most remarkable part of the plan was its self-sustaining nature. Each worm processes 50% of its body weight in soil every single day. That means a single worm moves about half its weight in earth through its digestive system daily, breaking down organic matter and releasing nutrients. A single colony doubles every 90 days under optimal conditions. The target: 1 billion worms within 3 years through natural reproduction alone. No chemicals, no constant human intervention, just biology doing what biology does best. Building the world's largest biological remediation project required infrastructure that rivals small cities. The total investment reached $780 million, a staggering sum, but still 80% cheaper than chemical remediation would cost at the same scale over time. 12 climate-controlled breeding warehouses were constructed on site, each the size of a football field. These worm factories maintain temperatures at exactly 20 degrees Celsius year-round, regardless of whether it's freezing winter nights or scorching summer afternoons. Together, these facilities produce 2 million worms every week, ready for deployment across the project zone. The facilities alone cost $96 million. Water infrastructure presented the biggest engineering challenge. The Kalgoorlie region receives less than 10 inches of rainfall annually. That's drier than parts of the Sahara Desert. To keep billions of worms alive and soil properly moistened, engineers built a desalination plant 80 kilometers away and ran pipeline networks delivering 5 million liters of water daily. That's enough water to fill 2 Olympic swimming pools every single day. Cost: $340 million. A network of 10,000 soil sensors now monitors every corner of the project in real time, tracking pH levels, moisture content, temperature, and microbial activity 24 hours a day. This $25 million Internet of Things system allows scientists to respond instantly when conditions change. If one sector gets too dry or too acidic, they know within minutes and can adjust irrigation or deploy additional organic matter. Perhaps the most impressive support infrastructure is the organic waste pipeline. Project Vermis signed agreements with 47 farms and food processing plants within a 500-kilometer radius. Every day, 500 tons of agricultural waste, everything from crop residue to food scraps to brewery byproducts, arrives to feed the worm colonies. What was once garbage heading to landfills now fuels ecological restoration. A solar farm covering 500 hectares powers all facilities, generating enough electricity to run the entire operation on renewable energy. That single investment cost $180 million, but ensures the project has zero carbon footprint and won't be affected by fluctuating energy prices. The first year was brutal. Despite all the planning, nature didn't cooperate. A heat wave in 2023 pushed temperatures to 47 degrees Celsius, nearly 117 degrees Fahrenheit. The red earth radiated heat like an oven. Worms began dying by the millions. Emergency cooling measures were deployed, shade structures, misting systems, and even underground refuges where worms could escape the worst heat. Workers sprayed water around the clock. An estimated 40 million worms perished during those 3 terrible weeks, nearly the entire original population. Critics declared the project a failure. One mining industry spokesman told reporters, "This is what happens when you throw taxpayer money at science experiments. Expensive worm farms in the desert. What did they expect?" But Dr. Chen and her team refused to give up. The surviving worms had retreated deep into the soil, following the moisture channels engineers had created. They had burrowed down to where temperatures remained cooler and water still flowed. 10 million worms survived. When temperatures dropped, something remarkable happened. The survivors began reproducing faster than anyone had predicted. By late 2023, soil sensors detected changes nobody expected. In areas where worms had been active longest, the pH had climbed from 3.2 to 5.8. Microbial activity was off the charts, showing thousands of times more living organisms than the baseline measurements. The soil was literally coming back to life. Then came the moment that changed everything. In March 2024, researchers planted test crops on a 500-hectare pilot section. Corn, wheat, and sorghum seeds went into soil that 2 years earlier couldn't support a single blade of grass. Scientists expected modest results, maybe some stunted growth, enough to prove the concept worked. 8 weeks later, they returned to check progress. What they found left them speechless. Corn stalks stretched over 10 feet tall, taller than any corn ever grown in Western Australia's history. The leaves were deep green and healthy. Root systems had penetrated 3 feet into soil that used to be rock-hard contamination. Wheat yields in the test plots measured 40% above the Australian national average. Dr. Chen called her colleagues to verify the coordinates 3 times. "I thought we were in the wrong location," she admits. "I kept checking our GPS. Where toxic red earth should have been, we found rich black soil and a field of giants. The transformation was so complete, I couldn't recognize where we were." The results from Project Vermis have shattered every expectation. Let's look at what 50 million worms accomplished in just 24 months. Soil pH improved from 3.2, highly acidic and toxic, to 6.1, near neutral and perfect for agriculture. That kind of transformation normally takes decades through natural processes. The worms achieved it in 2 years. To put that in perspective, it would take nature over 70 years to accomplish what the worms did in 24 months. Soil carbon content increased 800%. Each hectare of regenerated soil now captures approximately 50 tons of carbon dioxide. If scaled to all of Australia's abandoned mine sites, the carbon sequestration potential would be worth an estimated $200 million annually in carbon credits alone. That's not just environmental restoration, that's a revenue stream. The 50 million original worms have multiplied to 320 million and counting. Natural reproduction exceeded even the most optimistic models by over 40%. At current rates, the project will reach its 1 billion worm target 18 months ahead of schedule. Wildlife has returned in numbers that stunned ecologists. 34 bird species have been spotted in the rehabilitation zone, compared to 0 before the project began. Insects, small mammals, lizards, and native vegetation are all recolonizing land that was biologically dead for decades. The ecosystem is rebuilding itself. The economic implications are staggering. 12,000 hectares of new farmland, once worthless contaminated wasteland, is now valued at $180 million. If the method scales to all 60,000 abandoned mine sites, Australia could reclaim $50 billion worth of agricultural land over the next 2 decades. New jobs are already emerging. 2,500 positions during construction, 800 permanent roles in what's now called the vermiculture industry, and a projected 15,000 agricultural jobs once fully rehabilitated. Land enters production. Universities across Australia have launched degree programs in vermiculture engineering. It's become an actual career path. Young people are literally going to school to become professional worm farmers. Word of Australia's success has spread faster than anyone anticipated. Within months of the pilot results, delegations from around the world started arriving in Kalgoorlie to see the transformation firsthand. China sent 40 scientists and opened discussions for a technology sharing agreement. China has 2 million hectares of degraded mining land, and the potential applications are massive. If the Australian model works there, it could restore land capable of feeding tens of millions of people. Brazil signed a preliminary partnership to explore using vermiculture for Amazon mining rehabilitation, where illegal gold mining has devastated thousands of hectares of rainforest soil. Canada is funding a parallel research project in the Alberta tar sands region, one of the most challenging rehabilitation sites in North America. Perhaps most surprisingly, the United Arab Emirates is exploring whether similar biological approaches could improve desert soil for agriculture, adapting the worm biology for entirely different conditions. If worms can fix mining contamination, scientists wonder, what else might biological remediation accomplish? The UN Environment Programme has proposed international biological remediation standards, based on the Australian model. If adopted, these standards could reshape mining regulations worldwide within 5 years. The global mining industry is watching nervously. If Project Vermis establishes a precedent for mandatory biological rehabilitation, it could cost mining companies billions of dollars globally. Not everyone is celebrating. Mining unions in South Africa oppose the technology, worried about the cleanup costs it might force on their industry. Chile and Peru's copper mining sectors have lobbied against international standards. Russian state media initially dismissed the project as Western propaganda, though reports suggest they're quietly conducting their own parallel research behind closed doors. Some environmentalists have raised concerns that the technology could actually enable more mining by making cleanup seem easy, a valid worry that Australian regulators are actively addressing in new policy frameworks that require rehabilitation bonds before mining begins. The Australian government has approved expansion to 3 more abandoned mine sites, covering an additional 18,000 hectares. Construction begins next year. The total rehabilitation target now extends to nearly 200,000 hectares by 2032, which would make it one of the largest environmental restoration projects in human history. But challenges remain. The $120 million funding gap hasn't been fully resolved. Regulatory approval for scaling to other sites is still pending, as scientists work to ensure worm populations won't harm native ecosystems. And researchers acknowledge they need 10-year data before declaring permanent victory. We've proven it can work, says Dr. Chen. What we're still learning is exactly how far we can push it. Can worms rehabilitate uranium mine sites? What about coal ash deposits? Every contamination type presents different challenges. We're just getting started. The most ambitious proposal involves creating what planners call Australia's new breadbasket, a transformed belt of former mining land stretching across Western Australia that could eventually produce enough food to significantly boost the nation's agricultural exports to Asia. Ghost mining towns are already seeing property values rise by 40% as the prospect of farming jobs draws people back to regions they'd abandoned decades ago. Schools are reopening. Businesses are moving in. Communities that were dying are coming back to life, just like the soil. What's remarkable about Project Vermis isn't just that it works. It's that it represents a completely different philosophy for fixing environmental damage. Instead of fighting nature with chemicals and machinery, Australia harnessed biology's own power to heal wounds humans created. 50 million worms became 320 million. Dead soil became the most productive farmland in the region. A crisis became an opportunity. A wasteland became a breadbasket. Imagine degraded mining lands across the world, from Africa to South America to Southeast Asia, all transformed using biological remediation. Imagine former industrial wastelands becoming food production zones. Imagine a world where the damage humanity has caused can actually be reversed, not over centuries, but within years. The earthworms don't care about politics or profit margins. They just do what they've done for 400 million years: process organic matter, create tunnels for water and air, and transform dead earth into living soil. Australia simply figured out how to let them work at scale. So what do you think? Is biological remediation the future of environmental restoration? Or just an expensive experiment that got lucky? Could worm-based rehabilitation work in your country? Drop your answer in the comments below and let's discuss. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss more incredible stories about how humans are using innovation and nature together to solve our planet's biggest challenges. The earthworms are multiplying as you watch this.